The empire began to eat itself when no one was looking. The hum of printing presses echoes through the night, a low mechanical prayer to a new god. It is the sound of promise, the sound of decay. This is not the story of a battle. It is the autopsy of a dream of wealth so vast it became a cage. We are about to walk through the 7 rooms of that cage, to trace the fingerprints of fate left on gold and stone and paper, to listen for the whisper in the vault, the one that says, "This has happened before." We will linger in these ruins, for they hold a mirror to our own time, a reflection we dare not ignore, yet one we are conditioned to dismiss. This is the chronicle of the great undoing, the slow-motion collapse that is invisible to those living within its glittering lie. It is the history of the tide, which always recedes. The spark of ambition is always so pure. It is the fire in the human heart that looks at a wilderness and sees a kingdom. It is the legionary, not yet a conqueror, but a farmer with a sword, dreaming of land for his children. His ambition is not for endless conquest, but for security, for a legacy rooted in soil. It is the sailor on a Spanish galleon, squinting at an empty horizon, believing in a city of gold that must exist simply because he can imagine it. His ambition is for glory, for God, for a place in a story larger than his own humble origins. It is the merchant in a Ming porcelain shop, his hands stained with ink, calculating the wealth of a world that bows to his emperor. His ambition is for order, for a civilization so refined and powerful that its very name becomes synonymous with culture itself. It is the industrialist in a soot-choked English city, watching his furnaces blaze, convinced they are forging a permanent dawn, a future of limitless progress and comfort. His ambition is for a mastery over nature, a bending of the physical world to the indomitable human will. Ambition is the seed. It contains the entire tree, its strength and its eventual rot. It is the first breath of an empire and the first silent crack in its foundation. For ambition is a hunger, and hunger, once fed, only grows. It is a virtuous hunger at first, driving men to build, to explore, to create. But virtue in ambition is a fleeting guest. It soon finds itself evicted by a more permanent tenant. Greed, the desire not for enough, but for more. Not for stability, but for dominance. The spark is beautiful, a single flame in the darkness, but it cannot see the inferno it is destined to become. This hunger builds the forge of expansion. The spark becomes a fire. The fire becomes a furnace. The empire begins to sweat, to hammer, to build. It builds roads that stitch continents together. It builds ships that carve paths across oceans. It builds markets that hum with 1,000 tongues. Rome lays its stones, straight and true, from the misty highlands of Britannia to the deserts of Syria. Each mile of road is a vein pumping the lifeblood of legions, administrators, and trade deep into the conquered lands. The empire becomes an organism, a body with Rome as its heart. Spain floods its veins with the silver of Potosi, a mountain of metal that becomes the lifeblood of a global empire. The galleons become floating treasuries, their holds filled with the raw substance of power, sailing in endless caravans from the new world to the old. The wealth is so sudden, so massive, it feels like a divine mandate. The Ming dynasty unleashes the genius of its paper money, a breathtaking act of faith that binds the economy with a whisper. It is a system of incredible sophistication, a network of trust that allows commerce to flow without the burden of heavy coin. It is, for a time, a more advanced form of wealth than any the world has seen. Britain drapes the world in a web of railroads and telegraph wires, upon which the sun famously never sets. The forge here is powered by steam and coal. By the relentless logic of the machine, it produces goods at a rate never before imagined, and it requires a planet to feed its factories and buy its products. This is the age of the blueprint, the map, the ledger. It feels like creation, and it is. But every forge has two products, the sword and the chain. The empire is forging both. The sword is its military might, its economic dominance, its cultural influence. The chain is the dependency it creates, the provinces that rely on its grain, the colonies that exist only for its resource extraction, the financial system that becomes so interconnected that a tremor in the capital can become an earthquake on the periphery. The empire, in its expansive glory, is building a system of immense complexity and profound fragility. It is becoming too big to fail, and therefore too big to save. Then comes the turn, the subtle, almost imperceptible shift from substance to shadow. This is the veil of debasement. The empire's appetite has outgrown its larder. The wars are too costly, the monuments too grand, the people too accustomed to their bread and circuses. The treasury, which once held the cold, hard truth of mined metal, begins to look empty. And so, in a quiet room, a decision is made, a compromise, a lie. It is never presented as a collapse. It is framed as a necessary adjustment, a clever piece of financial engineering, a temporary measure to ensure stability. It is the moment the stewards of the empire choose to preserve the appearance of wealth over the reality of it. They choose to manage perception rather than address the underlying malady. This is the pivotal moment, the point of no return that every empire, without exception, has passed. In Rome, it begins with the denarius, a coin of pure silver, trusted from Gaul to Egypt. The first emperor, Augustus, strikes a coin that is 95% fine. It is a promise, weighted and real. You could hold it in your palm and feel the substance of the state. But the promise is expensive. Legions must be paid. Barbarians must be bribed. The colossal architecture of power must be maintained. A century later, the Emperor Nero, needing more money than his mines can provide, makes a small adjustment. He shaves the silver content. Just a little. Just enough. The coin looks the same. It feels the same. It buys for a time the same. But the seed of doubt is planted. The people may not understand metallurgy, but they understand feeling. They sense a lightness, a lack of heft. The merchants, with their finely calibrated scales, know the truth immediately. A century after Nero, the denarius is 50% silver. The debasement is now overt, a silent scream in the marketplace. Then, under the relentless pressure of crisis, it becomes a pathetic thing. A copper core dipped in a silver wash, a ghost of its former self. You could scratch it with your fingernail and reveal the deception. The emperors believed they were saving the empire. They were buying time. They were funding one more campaign, building one more wall, distributing one more grain dole to keep the populace quiet. They were merely watering its wine and telling the drinkers it was still strong. They were trading the long-term health of the economy for short-term political survival. The denarius, once the symbol of Roman integrity, became a monument to its corruption. In Ming China, the deception is even more elegant, more modern. They invent paper money, the bao chao. It is a miracle of financial engineering, a note that represents real value stored elsewhere in silver or grain. It is light, efficient, modern. It eliminates the need to transport heavy bullion. For a time, it works, fueling an economic renaissance that is the envy of the world. The Ming state has created something from nothing, a system of trust that seems to defy the ancient limitations of metal. But the temptation is too great. The system is too seductive. When the treasury is strained by vast projects like the Forbidden City and the voyages of the treasure fleet, and by military campaigns against the Mongols, the solution is simple, painless, and catastrophic. Print more. The presses run. The paper floods the markets. The value of each note, its claim on real goods, evaporates. The state tries to force its acceptance, issuing decrees that taxes must be paid in this now worthless paper. But force cannot create value. The people, once believers in this paper covenant, lose faith. They turn back to the cold, heavy, inconvenient comfort of silver, and the state's beautiful, sophisticated system crumbles into worthless confetti. The Ming had discovered the secret of fiat currency centuries before the West, and they also discovered its inevitable end. The veil was made of paper, and it was torn apart by the winds of reality. In Spain, the debasement is not of the coin, but of the source itself. The rivers of silver from the New World, from the brutal mines of Potosí and Zacatecas, are not a blessing, but a curse in disguise. The sheer, unimaginable volume of metal inflates prices across Europe in a phenomenon later economists would call the price revolution. The empire, drowning in silver, feels rich. It builds the invincible armada. It wages endless wars against the Dutch, the English, the French, and the Ottomans. It consumes without producing. The silver flows into Seville and just as quickly flows out to pay for the luxuries, the textiles, the goods it no longer bothers to make at home. Spanish industry withers. Why work a forge when money falls from the sky? The wealth is an illusion, a fever dream bought on credit from its own colonies. The metal is real, but its value is being hollowed out by the sheer quantity of it. Each new shipment from the Americas makes every ounce of silver already in Europe slightly less valuable. The empire is not building wealth, it is circulating poverty. It is diluting the very substance of its power while boasting of its abundance. The veil here was the glitter of the metal itself, blinding them to the hollowing of their own economic foundations. Then comes the fever of illusion. This is the golden age of the lie, the point where the debased currency has not yet collapsed, but has created a bizarre, shimmering dreamscape. It is a period of spectacular, intoxicating prosperity for the visible few, and a slow, creeping anxiety for the invisible many. The bankers count their profits on paper, their hands trembling not with fear, but with the ecstasy of numbers that have lost all connection to earth. They trade in derivatives of derivatives, in complex instruments that no one fully understands, but everyone believes in because they are making money. The speculator becomes a king. The man who makes nothing but trades everything is celebrated as a genius. He is the new aristocrat, his wealth derived not from land or production, but from his ability to navigate the currents of the artificial economy. In the town squares, the crowd cheers its own undoing, drunk on cheap credit and the spectacle of their own apparent prosperity. They buy finer clothes, build taller houses, demand more exotic spices. The empire feels invincible. Its markets only go up. Its armies are unbeatable. Its culture is the pinnacle of human achievement. Art flourishes, but it becomes ornate, self-referential. A celebration of the surface philosophy turns inward towards sophistry and comfort, away from the harsh truths of the founders. The intellectual class, once the conscience of the state, becomes its courtiers, paid to explain why the boom will never end, why this time is different, why the old rules no longer apply. They create elegant theories to justify the unsustainable. This is the most dangerous stage, for the empire has begun to believe its own fiction. It has replaced the hard discipline of real value with the intoxicating, easy fantasy of perceived value. The man who points at the empty treasury, who questions the quality of the coin, who warns of the inflation eating away at the savings of the common man, is silenced. He is a pessimist, a crank, a traitor to the great, glowing dream. The state, the financial elite, the media, all sing the same chorus of inevitable progress. The foundation is turning to sand. But the palace has never seemed so grand, its parties so lively, its music so sweet. This is the empire's last glorious summer, and no one hears the autumn in the wind. The fever is a sickness, and its primary symptom is the loss of the ability to perceive reality. It is a collective delirium, and it is always, without fail, followed by a crash. Inevitably, the dream fractures. This is the fracture of faith. Faith is the invisible substance that holds a currency and thus an empire. Together, it is the collective agreement that this coin, this piece of paper, is worth what it says it is worth. It is a psychological construct, more powerful than any army. When that faith breaks, it breaks suddenly and completely. It is not a slow erosion, but a damn collapse. It happens in a market. A merchant, a practical man who deals in the reality of goods, refuses the emperor's new coin, demanding the old pure ones. A ripple of panic. Another merchant follows, then another. Gresham's law, an ancient and ruthless principle, takes hold. Bad money drives out good. The old trustworthy coins are hoarded, melted down, sent abroad. They become a shadow currency, the real economy retreating underground. Only the new debased money remains in circulation, its value plummets. The price of a loaf of bread, once a single coin, now requires a sackful. The soldier's pay, once enough to support a family, becomes a mockery. The pension of a lifetime of service buys a single meal. The numbers on the pay stub are the same, but their meaning has vanished. The fracture of faith is a psychological earthquake. The crowd that once cheered now riots. The baker is lynched for his high prices, though he is merely responding to the collapse of the currency he is forced to accept. The banker who once trembled with greed now trembles with terror as a mob gathers outside his doors. The state, in a desperate attempt to restore order, does the only thing it knows how to do. It creates more of the bad money, it raises taxes, it imposes price controls. Each intervention only deepens the crisis, proving to everyone that the state itself has lost control, that it is no longer the master of the situation, but a prisoner of it. The social contract, written in silver and gold, has been torn up. What remains is not a society, but a scramble of individuals, each trying to save themselves from the collapsing fiction. Trust evaporates. Trust in the currency, trust in the institutions, trust in the neighbor. The empire is no longer a shared project. It is a sinking ship, and every man is forced to become a lone swimmer. This leads to the flood of folly. The endgame. The fractured faith now unleashes a torrent of desperate, foolish, and ultimately self-destructive actions. The empire, bleeding from 1,000 cuts, tries to cauterize the wound with a torch. Its leaders, trapped by the logic of the system they created, can only double down on the strategies that caused the crisis. There is no imagination left for true reform, only a panicked adherence to a failed playbook. For Rome, it was the Edict of Diocletian in 301 AD, a breathtaking attempt to command the entire economy. By imperial decree, he fixed the prices of thousands of goods, from a loaf of bread to a British slave. The punishment for selling above the price was death. The result was economic paralysis. Why would a farmer bring his grain to a market where he would be forced to sell it at a loss? Markets vanished. Goods were hoarded or sold in secret. Black markets flourishing in the alleys where the official economy had died. The edict, intended to save the empire from hyperinflation, strangled what little economic life it had left. It was the ultimate expression of state overreach, a folly of monumental proportions. For Britain, the flood of folly was the slow, painful acknowledgement that its pound sterling was no longer the anchor of the world. The 2 world wars had bled the empire dry. It was drowning in debt, mostly to its former colony, America. The substance was gone. In 1949, it was forced to devalue the pound by 30%. It was a public admission of weakness, a crack in the imperial facade. The world's faith in the pound, the bedrock of its financial power, was shattered. Then came the Suez Crisis of 1956, the final humiliating proof that Britain was now a junior partner to American power. The sun was finally setting. The flood was not a single event, but a slow retreat, a managed decline that could not disguise the fundamental shift that had occurred. The empire had run out of monetary and geopolitical credit, and for the modern age, the pivotal moment was the Nixon shock of August 15, 1971. The United States, the heir to this long line of empires, found itself in a familiar trap. It had promised the world that its dollar was as good as gold, at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce. This Bretton Woods system had underpinned global finance since the end of World War II. But it had printed too many dollars to fund a war in Vietnam and a vast social program at home. The treasury was empty of the gold needed to back the paper in circulation. Foreign governments, notably France, began to suspect the truth and started demanding gold for their dollar reserves. The world was losing faith. So, on a quiet weekend, President Nixon severed the link. The dollar became a pure fiat currency, backed by nothing but the full faith and credit of the United States government. It was the ultimate act of debasement, hidden in technical language. It was the moment the world left the gold standard and entered the era of the pure illusion. The veil had been drawn across the globe. The flood of folly that followed was the explosion of debt, the financialization of the economy, the creation of vast, unpayable obligations, all built on the foundation of a currency that was now, for the first time in human history, completely untethered from any physical commodity. It was a gamble of unprecedented scale. We now live in the long, lingering aftermath of that decision. We are in the late stages of the fever, perhaps feeling the first cold tremors of the fracture. The pattern is not just a theory, it is a ghost, whispering from the ruins. When the substance, the gold, the silver, the real object of value, is diluted, replaced, or abandoned, The empire has signed its own death warrant. The doubling of the money supply, the flooding of the system with cheap credit, the monetization of debt. These are not modern innovations. They are the oldest tricks in the book written by Rome, by Spain, by the Ming, by Britain. The same chapters copied out again and again in the ledger of history, with only the names and dates changed. The signal is flashing. The warning is written in the dust of every treasury that ever thought it could outsmart the timeless laws of value. The final hush of oblivion is not a bang, but a slow fading. It is the sound of forgetting. It is the Roman road, once the symbol of unshakable order, now cracked by weeds and traveled only by shepherds who do not know the name of the emperor who built it. It is the Spanish palace, its gilded halls silent, its maps of a global empire curled and forgotten in a drawer, its titles now meaningless. It is the British factory, its machinery stilled, its chimneys cold against a gray sky, its products now obsolete. It is the sound of the printing presses, finally stopped. The dream is over. The wealth has wrecked itself. All that remains are the lessons, etched not in stone, but in the cyclical folly of human nature. The hush is the absence of the empire's voice, the end of its story. It is the moment it becomes history, a subject for archaeologists and philosophers, not for statesmen and bankers. The ruins of these empires are not just piles of stone, they are classrooms. And the lesson they teach is singular and stark. There is no substitute for substance. Faith can move mountains, but it cannot forever prop up a currency built on air gold, and silver are not just shiny metals. They are memory, they are time, they are the unforgiving ledger of a society's discipline, its honesty, its connection to reality. They cannot be printed into existence by decree. They must be mined, refined, and earned. They are the hard assets that survive the fall, silent witnesses to the rise and ruin of paper promises. They pass from the hand of a dying empire into the hands of the survivors, carrying their immutable value into the unknown future. They are the ultimate truth-tellers in a world addicted to lies. Every empire thinks it's different, until the smoke smells the same. If this story stirred something in you, subscribe to Wealth Rex, where the ruins of money still whisper their truths.